Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, come on. So, we've used words like forages. I'm going to use words like ruminants. I'm going to assume that we kind of know what those are. I do get to stand frequently in front of several hundred physicians and clinicians like nutritionists, and they don't know what those words mean. And so there are actually people who can get continuing medical education credits for me showing them some of what I'm going to show you, which is just remarkable. So, yeah, I'm gonna try to encourage you to think about forages and ruminant animal agriculture in a new way. I want to get people excited about it because I literally believe that humanity's future depends on it. So, we've already heard it. There's several of these things that you can see if you look around. You know, it's now only 27 years until 2050. And it came as something of a realization to me the other day that I'm not likely to be here to see 2050. I'm 66 and a half years old. That's just biology. It ain't fair. Just the way it is. But it could well be within your professional lifetimes. And you could work to help humanity achieve these goals. It's not going to just come from the US. We've got to work with people around the world. But world population will reach more than 9 billion people, depends on the model. You can see different numbers. That's not going to come from more children. In 2100, when they're estimating these numbers, they're going to be the same number of children 15 and under as there are today. It's going to come from Africans and Southwest Asians getting to live to be 70, 80, 90 years old. Double world food production, a lot of that can come from reducing food waste, but still we have to produce more food and it needs to be of higher nutritional quality. So this estimate is 66% increase in animal protein. Now I'm going to argue that that's an underestimate, but let's just leave that on the table. It's got to come from virtually the same land area that we have today, unless we have a lot of floating dairies. And then there's other things, like we got to double electrical generating capacity to meet the needs. So in all of what you hear going on, people are going to burn coal because right now 45% of humanity consumes less than 1,000 kilowatt hours per person per year of electricity. To convert that, that's a large North American refrigerator. That means is almost half of humanity lives in Chicago circa 1900. And they very much like to get closer to 2023. Think about what else they don't have without electricity. 70% of humanity is going to live in urban areas by then. So whatever agriculture is going to take place, most of the humanity is going to be somewhere else. How do we ship that food? And then the nutrients, how do they come back? People are talking about circular systems, and there's some things there that many people are thinking about. So our mission is to increase animal productivity to help feed the world, and then something about turf. So I'm laughing when I see them taking clippings off the soccer field to feed the cows. Yes. People here heard of the Green Revolution? Yes? And Norman Borlaug, his epitaph, according to some, is the man that saved 1 billion people from famine. Well done, good and faithful servant. Today we've got 3 billion people in the world suffering from malnutrition. Because malnutrition is not merely caloric insufficiency. Malnutrition can manifest itself in many, many ways when we're lacking the essential nutrients that we need. We can be overfed but undernourished. That's a concept that many people have difficulty with. So I've been calling, we need a ruminant revolution. We need to increase the productivity and efficiency of ruminant animal agriculture systems worldwide. It's going to look different in different places, but that's what we need people to get the vision for so that they can get the resources deployed, just like they needed to with public and private financing achieve the green revolution. We need to do the same thing for our ruminant revolution. The fact is we can't feed today's world, let alone the world of 2050, without ruminant animal agriculture. And as I said, we need to improve its productivity and efficiency. So, all clear on what forage is? Okay, I don't need to spend too much time here, but it's edible parts of plants. And there's different kinds. It can be browse, or it can be mast. That would be, for example, nuts on the forest floor. So the First Nations people in the east coast of the United States burnt the forests frequently, but they were burning the understory, not the trees. And that was so that they could collect the nuts as well as to make them more available for wildlife, to make hunting easier. But obviously, Barenbrug is mostly interested in the herbage. And there are different kinds of plants that fall within that category. Forb, broadleaf, edible. So, brassicas, what are brassicas? Cabbage, the cabbage family. And that would include rape and kale and plants like that. Grasses, I think that they're the biggest family of grasses, of plants in the world. You know, bamboo is a grass. Sugarcane is a grass. And of course, the cereal crops are all grasses. Who can think of a significant point to the legume family? We've already mentioned it, sort of. This would be a replacement for that concern. Biological nitrogen fixation? Sure. The clovers, alfalfas, the legumes have this ability through a symbiotic relationship with bacteria in their roots to take atmospheric nitrogen and make it available. What, 2/3 of the atmosphere that we're breathing is N2 gas, nitrogen gas, and it's completely unavailable to us in terms of being able to power plant growth, unless we have those legumes in the system, or we expend a lot of energy and capital via natural gas to Haber-Bosch process. Is that familiar? I think it's something like half of humanity is dependent on the Haber-Bosch process. Something like that. The ability to take N2 gas and reduce it, break that chemical bond, which is a triple bond, really tough. And from that we get nitrogen fertilizer. Of course, at first the Germans used it for explosives, but the Germans. And then there are other herbaceous plants that look like grasses, but they aren't. They're sedges, they're rushes. So those are things that would all fall under forage. And I'm glad to hear, fundamentals of agriculture. So that must mean forages, because forages are fundamental to U.S. agriculture. We look at the land of the United States, and 56% of it is not farmland. Or 44% of it is. And of that farmland, a quarter of that acreage, the total acreage, right? So over half the farmland is forage. 25% of total land is forage, to give you a sense. If we drill down and just look at farmland itself, 45% is going to be in permanent pasture, long-term pasture of some kind. And even if we look at the woodland and the cropland, as we'll get into very shortly, forages can be part of that as well. Okay? So unfortunately, we live in a world, this country, where we like to look at things as either or, us and them. There is no us and them, right? It's team human. Unfortunately, a lot of that farmland came from what ecotype, biome? Yeah, there's a hint on the screen. You think about Iowa. You're thinking of prairie. You think of much of the Midwest, the Corn Belt. You're thinking of prairie. In its original state, the grass grew so tall that they say they could grab it on either side of the horse and tie it over the saddle. That the sod was so thick that they had to have special plows made to break it. They built houses out of it. Sod shanties. They say that the roots were so thick that when they plowed it the first time, it sounded like cloth ripping. And the depth of this soil was amazing. And the fertility of this soil is so amazing that in North Dakota, when they first broke the sod and started planting the wheat varieties that they had brought with them, with the primitive equipment that they had and no inputs, their wheat yields are comparable to today's. It was this amazing gift. And I wish I could say we've made better use of that gift. So almost 80% of the prairie has been converted from that original grassland into farmland. In fact, grassland globally is our most endangered biome, far more than tropical rainforests. And if you learn about the prairies, you learn that there's a tall grass prairie in the eastern part, and then it goes to at the far western part, you've got a short grass prairie, and then in the middle, you've got mixed grass. Okay. So the tall grass prairie is virtually gone, and that's the Corn Belt. But still, almost 2/3 of the mixed grass prairie has been converted, and not much less, or actually a little bit more, of the shortgrass prairie. The shortgrass prairie being plowed is what led to the Dust Bowl down in southwest southeast, southwest Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas Panhandle, that area. But the Dust Bowl also happened up in the Dakotas. There just weren't as many photographers to capture it. How many people have heard something about if we weren't using all that land to grow livestock, we could grow more food? Anybody heard something like that? Wow. Am I that boring? Have I lost you? So let's imagine, here's an example for you. Let's imagine that all the Earth's land area is a soccer field. Okay, there's a difference between agricultural land and arable land, and not a lot of people keep that in mind. So if you were to represent the world's agricultural land on a soccer field, you wouldn't even make it to the kickoff circle. And then that arable land, which is the bit that you can grow human edible crops on by plowing. Oops. Go back, go back. Oh no. Escape. Back, back. There, yay. The arable land would be that area within the penalty area, but it would only make it to the penalty spot. I showed this to a grazer from southern Georgia, and he said, yeah, and that spot's getting closer and the goalie's getting nervous. We're losing our arable land to urban development, to soil degradation, for a number of reasons. One of the chief reasons is erosion, both soil and water. So imagine 24 billion metric tons of topsoil lost due to erosion worldwide. So that's about the size of Kentucky, 6 inches deep, every year. I'll make these slides available, so notes, because I need to go kind of fast. Love the quote, "When our soils are gone, we too must go unless we can find some way to feed on rock." And people are thinking that we can do that, but they're deluded. This was a quote from 1908. This is not new. Anybody, yeah, we just heard regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture. These things are not new. I'm real glad people are concerned about them and learning about them, but sometimes they act as if nobody ever thought of this stuff before. And so forage agriculture is also about conservation. Cover crops and soil health is another term that's out there. People heard of soil health? Okay. So keys to healthy soil. Keep the soil covered. Don't leave it bare. Plant high plant diversity, not just one species, but a mixture, maybe 6. 3 grasses and 2 legumes. Got it knocked. Okay. Minimize soil mechanical disturbance. When we till the soil, we necessarily degrade it. I'm not saying you should never till the soil, but I'm saying that when we do that plowing, we're going to oxidize organic matter. We're going to make that soil more susceptible to erosion for a period of time. You get the idea. Grow plants for maximum days each year. You heard about 300 days of grazing? This idea of keeping growing plants on that field for as much of the growing season as you can. That's going to vary depending on where you are. Incorporate well-managed ruminants. Now we're getting to it. Manage livestock to enhance soil function. So some people will talk like all you have to do is put the animals out there and everything's fixed. Well, you do that in some areas, you can have a mud pit. That's not enhancing soil function. Integrated cropping systems is a subject that I encourage people to look into. They're doing more work on this in other parts of the world. We've done work on this in regions of the U.S. for a number of reasons that are valid, but maybe we want to re-examine them. You can have, we in U.S. agriculture have had this specialization. We used to be these diversified farms where you would grow multiple crops every year. You'd have a number of different types of livestock on the same farm. And for a number of reasons, we've become far more specialized. And there, as I said, there are valid reasons to do that, but people are beginning to look at, well, maybe if we bring animals back into our cropping systems, we can see a number of benefits. And this, I think, is a real important path forward in our higher income countries, but it's still a reality in most of the world. At least half the cereals in the world are produced with animals in the farm system. Half of our fertilizer comes from animal manure, global. Half of the world's farmers still depend on draft animals. We're going to buy them all Kubotas? Going to send them all nitrogen fertilizer? Because people are talking about limiting or eliminating animal agriculture. How are you going to replace that? Developing country mixed crop livestock systems, most of them smallholders, supply a large proportion of cereal and livestock products globally. Right? So the world food system depends on these farmers. They're a critical part. And there's something like 700 million of the world's poorest depend on livestock for their livelihood. I'm going to say that this is the future. Here's an interesting study that was done in Brazil, which is one of the areas where they've done a lot of this work. So their system had been, we grow soybeans, then we harvest the soybeans, then we plant a winter annual pasture, then we graze cattle on it, then we come back and we plant soybeans again. Okay, so that's the cycle. Well, they asked themselves, instead of fertilizing the soybeans, what if we put that same fertilizer on the pasture? And what they found was they produced more forage. Not surprisingly, they fertilized it. But they also got more beef, but they got the same soybean yields. By moving that same input, because about 90% of the nutrients that a grazing animal consumes get excreted back. And so you're getting more turns of the same fertilizer input. And as fertilizer prices have been at record highs and are coming down, but they're still pretty high, and that's not going to rectify for a couple years at least, this sort of thing becomes more important. Agroforestry, silvopastoral systems, we can grow trees on the same land that we can grow forage. And sometimes that provides shade that benefits the livestock. Now we've got a multitude of enterprises on the same piece of land. And I've seen systems where they plant those in close planted rows of trees, but then they have a wide bit that they then grow soybeans or corn or something else in. So you can have that diversification as well in the rotation. And you can start thinking about carbon sequestration in this kind of system. But when it comes to producing food, ruminants are essential. Because there's really only three things you can do from land. Right? You can produce forage crops like hay or silage. You can produce pasture or range on that land without tillage. Or you can grow grain, oilseed, fruit, and vegetable crops. From the first two, that can go directly down to ruminants. The products of those enterprises we can't utilize directly. But the ruminants produce meat and milk and byproducts that we can use. Obviously, we're producing human edible crops, but even when we do that, we produce a lot of byproducts. One study said that for every pound of human edible vegan food, we're producing between 3 and 4 pounds of inedible biomass. And then non-protein nitrogen, ruminants can take that and create highest quality animal source protein. There's a whole topic there I'm happy to talk about. There's a number of topics I'd love to share on. But this idea of waste, plants are really inefficient ways to transfer nutrients from soil to humans. Something like 3/4 of the phosphorus that's in seeds, nuts, and legumes occurs in a substance called phytate. And phytate is indigestible by monogastrics like us. So it's just a pass-through. And we are facing a phosphorus shortage, not shortage, but limitation in the future. Domesticated species, we have something like 47 total that humanity has domesticated over the years. Vast majority of those are going to be ruminants. Not surprising, it's tricky to domesticate a carnivore. Don't want to get that one wrong. Something like 134 species of ruminants, 21 are domesticated. They are not competitive with humans. They're absolutely essential to the food supply for humanity today and tomorrow. They increase the food supply and improve food quality for humans. And they provide additional services, which we could go into. 4 stomachs in a ruminant. Don't need to spend too much time on that because you're not doctors, so you understand this. But basically, here's a schematic difference between a monogastric like us, or a chicken or a pig. And I know it's tricky to compare us to pigs, but there are 3 macronutrients that are essential for human nutrition. Well, for monogastrics anyway. That's tricky too. We have to have fat in our diet. We have to have proteins in our diet. Carbohydrates, in fact, aren't an essential macronutrient, but that's another point that we could go off on. So our stomach is acidic, and then we absorb through our small intestine. The ruminants, on the other hand, proteins and or nitrogen and carbohydrates, both in terms of fiber and non-fiber carbohydrates, are essential in the right proportions. The rumen is this massive fermentation vat with this multitude of microorganisms that break down the feed and then produce byproducts that the host animal either burps out in the case of methane or absorbs in the case of volatile fatty acids and ammonia. And then the microbes as well travel down into the acidic stomach ultimately, where they're digested. So the cow essentially harvests the microorganisms. Bovines, ovines, caprines, cervidae, cattle, sheep, goats, and deer. Again, 96% of what the world's domestic ruminant herd consumes is not human edible. 96% is not human edible. And that 4%, that's the grains, 1% of total, a quarter of those grains were deemed to be not human edible for a number of reasons, right? So this is a way to use off-grade cereals that otherwise would have to be wasted. So if you hear anybody say, so ruminants are essential for upcycling. They take a feed resource, if it's not human edible, they make it into something edible. Even if it is human edible, they make it more valuable. Okay, so this is upcycling. That's a critical function. They produce income. They produce fertilizer. They provide draft. There are ecosystem services that we can look at. And they provide fuel. It is a shame and it is a scandal that in this world today, 1 billion human beings are dependent on burning dirty biofuel, including dung, for cooking. This results in particulate pollution within their dwelling space, which results in increased respiratory diseases, primarily affecting women and children. And when we burn dung, we lose the fertility. There is much work we need to do. There is a big challenge for us, and we're being distracted by things that really don't, they're not sincere conversations. You know, all these projections about, we've only got 12 years, existential crisis. We used to know what to do with false prophets. Because if you've been around as long as I have, you've seen these kinds of predictions again and again and again. These people hate humans. Ultimately, that's what it gets down to. So here's some things that humanity's existential crisis is a lack of animal source food. Somewhere between 1/4 and 1/5 of children under 5 years old globally are stunted. This is not merely stature, right? This is cognitive development. Funny thing about the human brain, if you don't feed that human properly at specific times, the brain development is inhibited, and that's a lifetime decrement. Can't make it up. It's been estimated that that's an 11% of GDP drag in Africa. There are countries in the world where that rate of stunting exceeds 40%. That's a result of a lack of essential nutrition. And even the WHO admits that that's best provided by meat, eggs, dairy, seafood. And yet UNICEF estimates that 59% of children 6 to 24 months do not get meat, eggs, dairy, seafood. We have really high quality evidence, scientific evidence, of human beings being harmed by too little. Anything that talks about harm from too much is worldview. It's narrative. It's based on the weakest evidence that we have, and I'm happy to talk about that at great length. So Animal Frontiers, this one edition was Foods of Animal Origin, a prescription for global health. You can download the entire PDF and begin to learn about this essential subject. The Clear Center, UC Davis, is someplace to go to for...
I think you're done at 11:45, is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yep, we're almost done.
Okay, no, good. I just
Yep.
want to I'll pass these around while you're doing that.
So Clear Center, if you want to know about methane emissions, there's lots to learn there. Animal source foods and ethical, sustainable, and healthy diets is a dynamic white paper that I'm involved with. And then Meat Myth Crushers is a publication of the American Meat Institute. It is an industry document, but it's well referenced. And then anybody who's got a camera equipped or a phone that can take a picture of this QR code, you'll find there a book list on Amazon. I have no financial link to that. It's just an easy way for me to put a bunch of books in that I find interesting and have information that I think people might, with your copious free time for reading, might like to see. And so at that point, I'm done. That's the last slide.